Hello everybody, my name is Ensconce, and today we are continuing with the how-to Discord stagey stuff that we're doing, and today's going to be about ammo selection, which I think is a little strange of a topic, but I remember back when I started the game, and I did not know really what shells did, and I remember actually wondering, like, if I'm firing at a Balin target, do I shoot this, do I shoot that? I don't know. So I figure we'll go over shells, we'll talk about what they do, how they work, etc., and then we can go a little step further and start looking at some scenarios, take some questions from chat. If there's time, I might actually go into CV ammo, how that works, if we can go into any specifics on that one, or maybe torpedoes. But I think shells are going to be the most fired option in the game, so that's probably where we're going to stick to. So I have my trusty paint program, yeehaw, and we're going to go kick it off with that. So first off, we're going to be talking about shell types. There are 3 shell types in the game. There's armor piercing, which is AP. There is high explosive, which is HE, and actually is really close in terms of size, so that's kind of nice. That just looks good. And lastly is going to be semi-armor piercing, which we can just do semi-AP. So that's known as SAP. Over here, we'll have a little bit of a checklist in terms of ricochet. Then we've got another question about pen. And then we have a last question about, oh my goodness, I had this. I had it, man. Ricochet pen. And then there was one more, and it eludes me at the moment, which is terrible. I'm sorry. Let's see, bonus damage? Man, I had a third one. All right, so first off, we're going to be looking at armor piercing. Does it ricochet? Yes, it does. So ricochet is actually going to be pretty important. We need to make sure that we're factoring that. Pen. Does the armor piercing have pen? Yes, we're going to be needing to look at the penetrative force. And I'm going to actually put, for this one, however, I'm going to put a little star over here because we need to look into that a little deeper. And is there another one? Oh my goodness, there was, and I just can't remember. Ability to Citadel? Well, whatever. So for armor piercing, you're going to have to be checking, you're going to have to make sure ricochet as well as your pen value. For high explosive, you actually do not have ricochet chance. This is completely gone. If it hits, it sits. You know, all it has to do is touch, but it does actually have to pen if you want to do damage. But I'm also going to put a little star there, because there's a little bonus thing that high explosive can do. And then semi-armor piercing is kind of right in the middle, where yes, it can ricochet, but yes, it can only pen, and there's no actual asterisk to that. There's no little change there. So what is this? Armor piercing goes through multiple steps when it's interacting with armor. So if we've got a nice little sheet of armor here, we can go ahead and build that out. And you've got your shells coming in. We'll go ahead and go with that color because sure. And we'll say that this is an armor piercing shell. Does it have a chance to ricochet? It can. So this will be a shell coming in from the side. But this is going to be a shell coming in at an angle. I kind of want to do something like that. No, I'll have to flip it. We can do this. Flip. Vertical? Yes, we can. Cool. So if we do something like that, extend that out a little bit, we can start asking a question on if that's going to bounce or not. So for armor piercing, the first thing a shell's going to do when it's coming in is it's going to approach some armor. It's going to see if it's going to bounce. It's going to roll a ricochet check. How does that work? If the shell is coming in at greater than a 45-degree angle to the armor that it's coming in at, it has a chance to bounce. What would that end up looking like? So if you're coming in from, say, a 45-degree angle relative to the flat face of armor, it begins to want to be able to bounce. If it comes in a little sharper, then eventually it gets to something where it's called auto bounce. Auto bounce is where no matter what you do, if the shell comes in, strikes that armor, it's just going to ricochet, and it's going to ricochet harmlessly. It's going to do 0 damage. Oh, the other one was fuse. I can go ahead and put that up in just a bit. Anything further, all of this is auto bounce angle. So for the majority of AP shells, it's going to be a 45-degree angle going up to a 60-degree angle. 45 is where the chance to ricochet starts, meaning you have basically a 0% chance, maybe like 0.1%, whatever, chance of ricochet at 45 degrees. But as you go up to 60 degrees, it goes all the way up to 100%. And that actually scales linearly. So it just scales in a straight line, which means halfway between 45 and 60 degrees, you would have a 50% chance to bounce. There are shells in the game which have advanced pen angles, which can pen at higher distances. So you can start at 60, maybe going up to 67.5. I believe that's what the Des Moines uses. And SAP is actually going to be using that as well. But for armor piercing, ricochet is absolutely important. And while I think of it, I'm going to go ahead and put fuse over here, which we can go ahead and fill this column out as well. Does armor piercing have a fuse? It does. Does high explosive have a fuse? It does not. Does semi-armor piercing have a fuse? It does not. As you can see, this is going to take all three conditions to be able to do work. This is going to take only one condition to be able to do work, and technically, not even that. Technically, it doesn't have to pen, and it can still matter. But we'll talk about HE in a second. Semi-armor piercing has some of the condition states, but it's kind of an in-between sort of armor, or in-between sort of ammo. So first off, talking about the ricochet, we have ricochet angle. We're going to be calculating, does it bounce? So first question, or the first check, we'll say. You've got a shell coming in at this angle. Does this have a 45 degree angle? It looks like it's slightly less than 45 degrees, so the armor piercing would be able to bite and go into the ship. If you shot at this angle, it looks like it's a little sharper than that 45 degrees, which means there's a chance to bounce. Might not be in the auto bounce angle just yet, but it's probably fairly close. If you take a shot from the front, very likely you're going to bounce. How does this influence your behavior? Well, we'll talk about that a little later. But we just want to kind of dig into the concept of ricochets. Whereas if you had high explosive shells, which do not look at ricochets at all, high explosive shell is going to hit, it's going to deal damage, or at least it's going to try to deal damage from any angle that it's shot at, regardless of where it's coming in. As long as it touches, it explodes, it does what it does. The pen on it, not going to be as great though. So again, it might not deal damage, but you are going to have an interaction as basically a guarantee. As long as you're able to touch the ship with HE, you're doing the thing. Then we're going to go into semi-armor piercing, which is like armor piercing, but it has some differences. Namely, the semi-armor piercing, let's go with a different color. Semi-armor piercing has a much more aggressive shot angle. So whereas regular AP might be 45 degrees, going out to 60, improved AP might be like 60 going out to 67.5, or we have a small variety of different types. Semi-armor piercing can be pretty extreme. It could go up to 70, maybe up to 80 degrees. I think when the Venezia line first came out, it may have had something like an 80 degree angle where it would still stick. I do believe that got nerfed. I don't know the number off the top of my head though. I think it got nerfed down to about 75 degrees, 70, 75, one of the two. I bet somebody in chat has all of this memorized and has probably told you already. But SAP is going to have a much more aggressive chance to bite in, which is indicative of how it's going to be played. We can try to talk about situations a little later, so we go into that a little more. But first off, for ricochet purposes, ricochet is going to start. No, I liked the blue. Hey, blue. Ricochet is going to start at about a 45 degree angle, going out to about 60, give or take. And SAP is going to be a little more aggressive, starting probably about where the AP would stop and going a little deeper. So any point from this 45 degree going out to this edge here is where you really you can expect some kind of damage interaction. That being said, the further out, the tougher it is because it might actually bounce. So going over into pen, we actually have some asterisks here, but what is penetrative force? All of these are going to have a slightly different way that they work, but pen, basically when the gun is fired, I'm trying to do the arts. This is gonna look terrible. There we go. So there's a cannon. Looks amazing-tastic. And we'll give some armor on a ship over here. So the cannon's gonna fire at whatever range that it's firing, and It's going to hook up, but that's going to start to drop and have more of a shell drop at the end. This opening area is going to have much more speed as it's just exiting the barrel. But it's going to start to slow down the further it goes until eventually it's going to drop in the water because it's going to run out of steam. Gravity and running out of magic juice is basically just going to null the shot. So as you get further away, the armor piercing is going to start losing pen. For high skill players, they will actually memorize. They'll actually look at charts and they will memorize exactly how much you are going to be penning at various ranges. So given this gun that I'm just drawing here in paint, this might pen out to 200 millimeters. This might end up penning out to 150. This might pen out to about 120. These ranges, or these amounts of value, are going to correlate to two things. One, the further out the shell is moving, the slower it's traveling, but also the more that it's dropping. And because it's dropping, that's actually going to affect how it interacts with armor. Let's see what that means. So if we look at a block of armor here, and we'll say that this is 20 millimeters, just for the lulz of it. Or actually, I'll say 19, because I play a lot of DDs. So this will be 19 millimeters. If you have a shot that's going to be coming in basically flat, you are right next to this ship, and you're just firing, boom, right through it. It's basically going to be flat, in which case, how much is this, how much penetrative force does this shell need to be able to go through? It needs 19 millimeters. However, if you're firing at a further distance, maybe that shell is actually coming in at an angle, in which case it's going to need a little further to get through. That might end up needing something like 22 millimeters of armor, because it's actually traveled further to get through the armor. And if we had a really aggressively weird shot, you might see something like that, in which case this 19 mil ends up being something like, I don't know, 19, 38, 50 something, 50, 60 millimeters of armor, which actually can matter, although I would say that's rare. But we can talk about that when we get to fuses. So for armor piercing shells, in order to actually breach the armor, the asterisk means the further away from your target, the harder it's going to be for the armor piercing to breach the armor that you're going after. Specifically to get to the Citadel, which is usually going to be well armored. So you might try to get Citadels at closer ranges, whereas you might not be able to get them at further ranges. So armor piercing, yeehaw. Moving on, we're going to talk about high explosive. High explosive has a set amount of penetration. So if you are using, if you're using a Ship Smasher, Ship Smasher has, I think, 18 millimeters of pen on its HE. Could be something that, it might even be 16. It's quite small. So when it's coming in, it's just going to hit, and it's going to boom, and it's not going to matter. It's going to pop on the outside. It's basically like throwing a rock at a tank. Good luck. It's just not going to get through. Good news is it's not going to ricochet, and it is going to hit. And if you notice, there's a little asterisk here, which means that the very fact that there was some kind of explosion on the outside of this armor may actually set that section of the ship ablaze, which can be pretty impactful in terms of damage. Armor piercing is going to be really powerful when it gets a Citadel. High explosive is fairly powerful when it gets a fire. Why is there a difference? Because fires can be repaired. Fires can be fully repaired. You can also, if you're firing HE at a spot that's already on fire, you can't set another fire there until that fire goes out. So it's a conditional behavior as opposed to just powerful raw damage. But even if you're not shattering, you still have a chance to light a fire, which is important. And that can affect ammo choice as well, which we can talk about in situations and stuff later. SAP is going to be a little different. So I guess I'll extend the example. So if we have another shell that comes in with 22 millimeters of pen, that comes in here, it's actually, I'm showing it as breaching the armor, but that's probably not correct because it explodes on contact. It doesn't have a fuse. But for purposes of cool looking, it's going to blow through the armor because awesome. And note, the ricochet doesn't matter. And also, this plating here is not affected by the angle of incident. So that HE could come in all the way from downtown, hitting it here, and it's still going to breach through The pen value does not change regardless of how this is shot. It can be shot from an angle, it can be shot straight, it can be falling, it can be doing whatever. All it's going to do is look at this raw number. If this is 33 millimeters of pen and it's hitting a 19 plate, it's going through. Done. No questions asked. Oof is applied. Semi-armor piercing is a little different, only in that it can ricochet, but that's the only difference. So if the shot is coming in flat, semi-armor piercing tends to have quite a bit more pen than high explosive. So high explosive is sort of a safer option. It's a more continuous, I'm gonna interact with something and it's gonna have that interaction. I'm gonna do something. Maybe it's not great, but it's something. Armor piercing is, if I get a good shot, it's gonna hurt. It's gonna hurt a lot. But that's only if I get a good shot. If I don't get a good shot, I might get something kind of weak or just nothing at all. Semi-armor piercing kind of in the middle there, it is more likely to do something, but it is less likely to be devastating. So semi-armor piercing will tend to have a little more damage than the high explosive because it can't set fires, but it's also less likely to get a full penetration into a ship and deal citadel damage, unless the citadel is literally all the way to the outside of the ship, which doesn't happen in many cases. So if you have sap coming in, odds are it's going to be able to breach this 19, because sap has so much higher pen, whereas a ship smasher, say, that's throwing 16 millimeter penning HE, if it had a sap shell, would probably be doing something in the 30s or the 40s. It's a significant increase in terms of the penetrative force. Now, if it's coming in at this aggressive angle, the 19 is not a problem, but it could ricochet off the armor. That would be a problem. Now, it's unlikely that the shell's going to drop it this aggressive of a line, but still, it is something that you have to factor in. It can bounce. So even if the thickness of the armor is under the amount of penetration that the semi-armor piercing shell has, you still have to factor in, will it bounce? Because if it will bounce, then you have to either reposition or you have to use a different ammo type. And there are some ships out there that have armor piercing and sap, which means if you're in a position where sap is going to bounce, you're also in a position where armor piercing is going to bounce, which means you're really not going to be expected to do any damage at all. You're going to have to move your ship, or you're going to have to pick a different target. And then next up, we have the fuse. So let me go ahead and put that 19 back. All right, so a fuse is 1/6 of the millimeters of the shot. So if we have, we'll talk about the Ship Smasher again. Ship Smasher has, if I recall correctly, 100 millimeter guns. So 100 divided by 6 ends up equaling 33, 17 point something. I'll just say 17 millimeters of armor, because that's going to be easy. So in this case, if Ship Smasher is throwing armor-piercing shells, which do have a fuse, at this 19 millimeter plate, as they're traveling through, this 19 is thicker than the 17. It's going to arm the shell, in which case it's going to go through just a small distance before the shell is going to activate. It's going to have breached the armor, and then it's going to explode. If we are not using a Ship Smasher, we're instead using 203s, say. 203 divided by 6 equals, don't have this one off the top of my head, but it's basically going to be 17 times 2. We'll say 34 or maybe even 35 millimeter. I'll just throw the 35 to be safe. If you've got this shell coming in that's from a 203 off of like a heavy cruiser, it's going to come in. I'm trying to think of a good color for this. And there is almost no way that this 19 millimeters is going to be thick enough to actually arm the shell, which means this is going to go through all the way through the other side of the ship and back out, in which case that's going to be an overpen because it never detonated. It never actually turned on. If we look at this in terms of like that aggressive angling, what kind of degree angle would you need? So if this is 19, this might be 20. This might be like 23. This might be like 26. This might be like 30. This might be like 35. And you can already see just how aggressive that angle is. The good news is with some AP shells, you have those advanced pen angles. You might actually be able to strike at such an off angle that it actually primes the fuse and bites into the ship and does full damage, which could be pretty kicking. I'm going to go ahead and turn on my game now that it's finished updating. We could go into a training room and look at some of this. In which case, that might arm the fuse, and then shortly after it breaches through, it's going to pop in the hull and deal full damage, which can be pretty gnarly. Armor piercing can be pretty kicking for that. And remember, high explosive has no fuse. It hits, it explodes. Done. Semi-armor piercing has no fuse. It hits, it explodes. Done. Unless it ricochets, in which case it won't explode. Armor piercing, you need to meet all three conditions. You need ricochet, pen, and the fuse to align so that you can get a penetrating hit to deal full damage. Now this can actually be one of the reasons why people get frustrated with battleships against cruisers, where they get to shoot at a fully broadside cruiser and they're waiting for that jackpot. They're waiting for that, oh, it's the money shot. Everything's like stars are gonna align. This dude's dead. Overpens. What? In some cases, they may actually hit the Citadel, but still overpen. But that can be pretty interesting, and we'll be able to check that out here. So I'm going to set this for training room. And boop. We can look at this a little deeper in just a bit. So I'm going to continue with paint if that's okay. Well, I suppose actually using this, we could probably go into the training room and look at some stuff. So how about I will go ahead and hop in an Elbing, because Elbings are fun. I'm going to go ahead and I don't want to close that. Good. And it allows me to shrink it. That's fine. I'm going to check out an Elbing. For some, like German destroyers were the first destroyers I got to tier 10. So I like me some German destroyer. And also the Elbing is quite accurate, so it's very useful. And let's go ahead and add some bots for me to shoot at. So I'll go with some US. We got some cruiser. Cruiser we'll do some Des Moines. We'll do some DDs. However, I'm not going to pick the US one because it has a slightly different armor scheme. So I'll just go ahead and pick a German destroyer because it should be covered in 19. And we can also pick a battleship for the funds. Pick us a Montana. And so we've gone into training room. We've set it, I use the armor resilience for ocean. You can set it to ocean armor resilience. That way the ships are close. And you can go ahead and populate with enemy bots so you have stuff to shoot at. You don't have to make them so they move and shoot. You could, of course, add that if you'd like. And we're going to do the thing. So I'm going to go ahead and drop in this and we'll be able to check out some information. So the Elbing has 150 millimeter guns, if I remember correctly. I think they're actually round. We'll double check here. They are 150 millimeters. So what is the fuse on the 150 millimeter? Going to be divided by 6 equals 17 and then half again. Ugh, should probably just use a calculator so I can be correct on this and be happy. But divided by 6, it's going to be 25. Well, hell, that was actually an easy number. That's pretty terrifying that I had to use the calculator for it. So 25 millimeters is what we need to be able to pen with AP. Not because we claim freedom, we can check here and we'll see 150 millimeters. Maximum damage is 4,100 on our shell. So before we talk about damage and stuff, we're really just looking at pens and stuff like that. I'm actually going to turn off the sound here. I don't think you guys can hear sound with the way that I'm broadcasting, but yeah. So at this point, if we look over here on the map and see roughly what angle we've got, that's looking about 45 degree-ish. Give or take, I think it's slightly on my side of it. And with this...
Chaos Cons?
Hello?
I'm sorry. You have the paint thing covering
the screen?
No,
not the paint thing.
MS Paint. And you had some questions and people
Wait, I can.
inviting to speak.
I can hide the paint thing. There we go.
There you go. Sorry. I'll hide away now.
It's okay. Hey, you can hang out. It's all right. This is Jambijan. He's a CM. I got to stream with him the other day. All right,
Hello,
so
everybody.
let me answer some questions and then we'll do the thing. Somehow MS Paint always makes more sense. Yeehaw. Oh my goodness. If you had questions, don't be afraid to repeat them. just so I'm not checking all this. Optimus Prime, can you say something real quick? Sure, go ahead. Isn't SAP closer to short fuse AP? I don't think it detonates immediately upon impact. Otherwise, it would just be a heavy HE shell. It is not short fuse AP because it is instant fuse AP. So again, if we look at this little chart thing, as far as the fuse goes, the only ammunition that actually has a fuse is armor piercing. Now, there are ships in the game, the Minotaur, for instance. If you actually look in the port at the ammunition that the Minotaur throws, the UK light cruiser, it's listed as SAP. But it is an armor-piercing shell. And as an armor-piercing shell, it has a very fast fuse. I think it's like 10 milliseconds is what it is. Might even be less than that. It might be 5 milliseconds. But it does have a fuse, whereas semi-armor piercing does not. As long as it, once it hits, it primes. It primes, it pops. It does not penetrate at all. So, worth knowing that. Where will the video be uploaded to? I've been recording these and uploading them to my YouTube, just to be helpful in case people miss this. And I'll probably put the YouTube link in the chat thing when it's done doing whatever. The way it worked in real life is very different from how it works in the game. Well, we are a game, so we have some rules on how stuff works. APHE is the current AP. Sorry, I don't know what that one is. And were there any other questions? Dude, really like your explanations. Thank you very much. Where will the video be uploaded to? I have a personal YouTube, so I'm recording this right now, and I'll just upload it that way. Does the game ever explain how SAP works beside the tooltips? You've seen a lot of people confused by it. There are how it works videos in the port. If you can remind me, I can show you where they are, but I am in a training battle, so I'll go ahead and do the training battle thing. All right, well, I'm going to assume that that was all the questions. If you do have more, don't be afraid to put them into the chat. But thank you very much, Jambajon, for warning me about paint. So we're going to take some AP shells, and we're going to fire at the Z52. So this is 19 millimeters of armor, but we have about a 45-degree angle. So will this thicken up? Will this 19 be at such an angle that it thickens up to 20? We'll take the shot. It's a very accurate shot because Elbing. And it looks like actually yes. So if we get a pen from our AP shell on this Z52 at this angle where that 19 has thickened up a bit because we're striking it at an angle, that pen damage was 1300. I think it was actually 1353, which is pretty gnarly. Versus, we'll go over here to HE. And every ship line is a little different. The German line actually has really excellent penetration on its HE shells, but it has crappy damage. The AP tends to have really good damage, but not great pen. So we're going to throw an HE shell and see what happens. We only got the one hit before. It looks like we're probably going to get two here. And the two hits gave us 1188, which means if we had one shell, we'd only be dealing about 600 damage. So one shell of HE is going to deal almost half of what one shell of AP is going to do if you're able to make it stick. But we're going to speed up here. We're going to move forward a little bit. And I'm going to throw AP at the nose of this destroyer. And I'm going to aim deliberately where it's a little thin. So even if we prime, I think as we're getting a better angle here, a more of a flat angle, it's not going to be able to actually arm that fuse. But we're going to take a shot right here at the nose with HE, where we get 2400 damage. And now that we've gone back to AP, let's take a shot at the nose and see what happens. 410, 820, we got 3. These are called overpens. So the armor was not thick enough to actually arm the shell. Basically, if you can imagine like an armor-piercing bomb that's supposed to break into a bunker and then explode. If the first thing it hit was a tissue box that was on the roof, that tissue box, it's wanting to go not just through the tissue box, but also through the table and then through the floor and then through the measurable amount of concrete to get inside the bunker. But if it's able to penetrate the tissue box of the table, it's going to hold on to its charge because it's like, nah, I'm not there yet. I'm not where I'm supposed to be. I'm an armor piercing thing. I got to wait till I pierce a bunch of armor and then I'll know I'm at the spot where I'm supposed to shoot. So the armor piercing shot here, if it goes through not enough armor, it's just going to keep going until eventually it finds the armor or it hits the water, in which case it's just going to detonate and do nothing. If we instead shoot at the Des Moines here, We could shoot at the nose of the Des Moines, which I believe is 27 millimeters of armor. So if we think about that, we need 25 millimeters to pen to activate that fuse, in which case we should get some pretty decent damage while if we're shooting here. And it turns out we have a penetration, but we also have an overpen. I believe one of these struck a little high. Well, what about instead of shooting here where the boat has this thicker area, we shoot right at the tip of the nose where we might arm the shell, but it's still going to take a little time before the shell explodes, in which case we just end up getting an overpen. So it broke into the nose and the fuse armed, but it went just enough distance to get out the other side of the ship before it popped. That's going to result in an overpen. So in this case, we probably want to shoot more into the meat of the ship, where we're going to have 27 mil here. If we can hit this upper casemate area, we'll probably get 2 pens and some pretty decent damage, 2,700 off of just one single turret of the of the Elbing. If we go a little lower, there's going to be a thicker belt of armor. That thicker belt of armor is going to protect the Citadel. The destroyer's not going to have it. And if we remember, we've got this pretty flat angle here, so probably just overpens. We might be able to try to do a trick shot where we hit this water and see if we can prime off the water such that it's going to explode in the ship, but no, that's just not going to take. What if we instead fire at this cruiser, but we try to aim at the waterline where that Citadel armor is? It's either going to pen and give us a Citadel, or it's going to shatter. In this case, we are close enough that we're able to get that Citadel. But if we were firing at a ship that was a little further away, the shell drop might increase, so it's biting through more of that armor in a flat kind of way, or it's digging deeper through the armor, so it increases the thickness. And the further the shells go, the slower they are in the air. They lose velocity, so that also is going to reduce penetrative force. So while we might be able to Citadel a Des Moines at 8 kilometers, we might not be able to Citadel at 10 or at 12 or at whatever the hell the number is. So if you really have a ship that you like playing and you want to dial in on it, you can look up using some, there's a great site called shiptool.st. That's shiptool.st. That can show you gun arcs as well as penetration values at different ranges. Can be super helpful, but for the most part, if you're going to use AP, you're using it to try to get through armor. So if you are heavily angled, let's see if maybe we've got a Des Moines right over here. So this Des Moines, if we look at it, is at about a 45-degree angle. It's pretty tough. That means that's going to thicken up that belt armor. Now, we shouldn't bounce because 45 degrees is where you start to bounce, so we shouldn't have to worry about ricochets, but are we going to be able to penetrate at this range? Yes, we are. If we back up a bit, though, we're going to increase the angle, and we're also going to increase the relative thickness of the armor. So we might end up having some shatters. So far, we've got overpens and penetrations, but we'll back up for a bit and see if we can actually get to that angle where we're not going to have consistent results anymore. And to see what a shatter looks like, we can go ahead and shoot at the Montana here and shoot at the belt armor, because pretty sure that's not going to go through on a battleship. Battleships are extremely well armored, so you get 3 non-pens. And you'll notice we also got an overpen. The overpen, even though it was a little low, might have ripped through and not been able to fuse. And I think that's probably a little weird, but maybe we struck up in the superstructure somewhere, so it struck slightly above the deck. All right, so we have a more aggressive angle on the Des Moines here. The Elbing has improved AP angles, so even though we've got this pretty aggressive shot, it might actually still stick. In fact, we could try that by shooting at the Z52 here. We'll see if we're definitely going to get pens if it sticks. And it does. We get 5. 7,000 off of a single salvo from a destroyer into another destroyer is pretty nasty. So if you have an option, if you have the opportunity to fire your AP without worrying about it bouncing and making sure that the fuse is going to prime and probably pop within the meat of the ship, you absolutely want to use it if you can. But there are situations where you just can't guarantee that. You might be in a destroyer fight where the destroyer is turning in and out, sideways up, whatever. It might be pointing at you. And the further this angle gets, I could also just sail toward these. The further this angle gets, eventually you're going to have a point where you're just not going to be able to pen in. Although this is where we're going to just watch the Elbing continue to be amazing. Let's see if we can still pen the Des Moines Citadel at 9 clicks at a fairly aggressive angle. The answer is probably, but also maybe not. So now we're just getting pens. and shatters. Why pens? Why shatters? What about that resulted in those two? So the 5 pens, we probably hit the casemate, which is the armor above the citadel plating. That's kind of the meat of the ship, but it's not the special tickle me Elmo spot on the ship. Meaning, because this has 27 millimeter, our 150 millimeter guns probably have a pretty significant amount of pen at 9 kilometers. I'm just going to make up a number and say like 80 or 90 millimeter, in which case we have more penetrative force than we need to be able to get through that. So first off, we pass the ricochet check because we've got really good angles on our shells on the Elbing. They're special for the angle. Then we pass the penetration check. Do we have enough pen to actually get through into the meat of the ship? Yes. And then, did we fuse? We did, because the armor thickness was thicker than 25 millimeters that we went through, so it knows, okay, it's time for me to pop, and it's going to pop inside the ship. So we'll take another shot, and we'll see if we can hit the citadel. Odds are, if we hit this belt armor, because we're at such an angle, we get some shatters, but again, some of the shells went high, and they stuck in the casemate. So at this point, do you shoot at the citadel? Well, the answer is no. There's also another option, which is you shoot HE. So we can still shoot, instead of aiming at the citadel, we aim a little higher. We aim at the casemate, and we'll see if we can get good hits there. And it turns out, yes, we get 5. So AP is perfectly fine to use in this situation because we've identified this is our target. We don't have a concern about ricocheting. We don't have a concern about overpenning because we are properly priming the fuse on our shot. So yes, we can use AP here. What if we shot a little higher though? What if we shoot at the superstructure? This is only like 16 millimeters of armor. So even though we're angled, we're still going to get overpens. So it's not going to be a completely just amazing target to shoot. The Des Moines might be moving, turning, shifting, speeding up, slowing down, reversing, doing all kinds of things. So if the Des Moines is too hard to hit for you to accurately place shells exactly where you want them to go, well then that's when you're going to want to choose HE. So high explosive does not have a ricochet check. If it hits, it hits. Then it doesn't have variable penetration. It's a single pen value, 38 millimeters on here. Now I know that the Des Moines is 27 on the front, 27 at the tail. It's got 30 millimeters on the sides. I might have said 27 earlier, so that'd be wrong. Has 30 millimeters on the sides and the deck area. And then it's going to have a bunch of armor covering its citadel, something like 110 or whatever. And then the superstructure is weak. So if we shoot the nose, we have 38 millimeters of pen. If we shoot the nose and we hit, it's damage. If we shoot the side above the citadel and we hit, it's damage. If we hit the superstructure, it's damage. If we hit the rear of the ship, it's damage. If we hit the citadel, it's not. If we hit the guns are actually fairly well armored. So we can shoot at the superstructure here. And we can't overpen with HE. As soon as it hits, it pops, meaning we're going to get some damage. So in this case, we got 6 hits. It was 2,400 damage versus, it was 4 hits for 18 versus if we shoot at, we'll say the superstructure, this Des Moines over here with armor piercing, and we're just looking at overpens, what are we going to end up getting? 5 overpens for 2,000. There's actually an advantage for using overpens, but I can talk about that in just a second. So before we completely move away from HE, there's another reason to use HE. So let's actually move in to an angle where we start seeing ricochets. That'll be sort of the next thing that we'll look at, and we'll eventually look at SAP, but we're not quite there yet. So you can get the guns turning, pop the engine boost just so we're not waiting, and we're gonna move into a position where we can get some bounces. So first off, here's a destroyer, Z-52. Z-52 has 19 millimeters of armor, and we've done some pretty good damage to it. But as we get deeper and deeper into this angle, this is where we start looking at those bounces. Now, normal AP would already be bouncing, but this special AP, the advanced pen angles, this is probably where it's just too darn aggressive. Let's take a shot. And it's all just gonna skip right off the side. We could shoot the superstructure even. The superstructure, we get some overpens, that's nice, but that's about the best that we can do. Now we might have a little bit of overmatch going on. I think the armor on a destroyer is pretty terrible for the superstructure. It might be 13 millimeters. So 150 mil might actually overmatch that, which means it would not have a ricochet check. But shooting the meat of the ship with the 19 millimeters, it's going to bounce. Oh, well, we were able to get one. So this angle is just enough that the Elbing has some possibilities there. Take some shots at the Nemoine, see what we can do. See if we can pen maybe on the nose. Looks like no. And if we're not able to pen here, there's a really good chance we're not going to be able to pen there either. Nope, again, we're going to get the bounces. And we'll take a shot superstructure. Superstructure is not purely flat. It has all kinds of nooks and crannies and sideways and edges and such that you probably are able to bite into it, which is why you're going to see battleship players, if you ever watch any Twitch streams, where a battleship might have AP loaded just about all the time. And if it turns out that an enemy ship is just pointed really aggressively, like maybe this Montana here, the battleship's not necessarily looking to shoot through the nose, they're just looking to shoot, and what's in their guns is AP. So rather than shoot and potentially just bounce, this might actually pen at this. No, okay, mostly bounces. If it was going to be shooting AP that doesn't have advanced characteristics, they'd just be like, well, screw it. I'm just going to shoot into the superstructure. It's pretty big. It might not actually fuse the shell, in which case you might see a penetration, but even though you get this cool penetration ribbon, you might see only an overpen's worth of damage, because if the shell doesn't arm, it doesn't explode. It just goes through. So once again, we take some shots. So the other thing that HE is going to do is set fires. So we can do this. So we're at an aggressive position. We could try to shoot the superstructure and get some overpens. We could do that. This Des Moines is pretty low. Why don't we take some shots? But because of what we learned, because of what we know about high explosive, I could try to shoot the superstructure behind the guns. That could work. And because these are so accurate, it's probably going to hit. But in other ships that might be less accurate, you might end up hitting the guns and shattering, which is okay. You might still get a fire, but you could actually just shoot the nose of the ship, in which case it's got basic armor and it's directly pointed at you. So it's completely open for you to shoot. You will actually see some players do this, especially when it's like the enemy ship has very little health. Something to note is that there's only so much health in a specific area of the ship, so when you start to saturate, it'll take reduced damage. But here we've set a fire. Fire goes directly to the health pool of the ship, and it will take it out. The first fire we set against bots, they might actually damage control that. And if this ship had a heal, it could heal back the fire damage, so it's not devastating like a Citadel is, but it's still significant. And against Montana, we could shoot, well, with this HE, 38 millimeters, we could actually shoot anywhere on the ship and be able to pen it, which is very comfortable, because if we don't have the ability to deal damage with AP, then we will still have the ability to deal damage with HE, even though high explosive deals 1800 damage a shell versus armor piercing's 4100. So you're dealing a lot less damage, but you might set a fire. And if you can get a pen, it's going to stick, and you're going to get some damage off that, and that's nice. So going through all this, does anybody have any questions? The training room's about to end. So I will once again check and see if there are any questions, and then we can continue on doing the thing. AP HE armor piercing high explosive is basically what all naval AP shells were, still penetrates armor and then explodes on the inside. Well, in our game, AP, the only thing that actually will breach a wall to go to an internal part of the ship is armor piercing. No other shells will do that. So if we look in the port, for instance, if we look at, we're going to look at the Baltimore, I think. Yay, stuff, woo, stuff. We're going to look at the Baltimore here. Here. Come on. Okay, yes, there's stuff. Let me also add tier 8, because I'm familiar with the Baltimore's side. So as we look at the Baltimore here, you can see that the Citadel goes all the way out to the edge of the ship, meaning it's directly accessible. 152 millimeters, which is quite thick. So this is unlikely to get breached by high explosive. Some of the best high explosive in the game, I think, goes up to like 105, 110 millimeters. So very unlikely you're actually going to get this breached by high explosive. Armor piercing, as long as it can deal 152 millimeters, it will go through the armor and then explode on the inside, which can deal citadel damage. However, sap, if we look at an Italian battleship, while we're kind of doing the thing, we'll look at battleships too. Italian battleship, we'll look at the Colombo. So the sap on the Colombo deals 96 millimeters, so that's not going to be enough. 96 would not be able to pen that. And I'll be honest, I think the Ruggiera has 457s. Those are going to be quite a bit bigger than this. I think that's a steel ship. So let's actually check. Let's check the Lauria. Because I'm curious. I'm curious if we get a sap pen on the side of a Baltimore. There are other ships like the Smolensk that have very, very thin citadels. Steel. Here we go. Check this out, please. And we look at the main battery. It's, for the semi-armor piercing shell, it is 114, which means that would not be enough to pen through the outside. But it would be enough to pen through the outside of... Let me look at the Smolensk. If I can find it. Moskva? What's the Moskva's side armor? It's 155, so that's going to be a no. But if we check out the Smol, Smol is a light cruiser and has 70 millimeters. So in this case, you could actually get citadels through semi-armor piercing and also HE. So if you throw HE out of a very large battleship gun, it could actually pen over 70 millimeters, in which case you could deal raw citadel damage to a Smolensk. You can also, just as a fun thing, the Ranger, a tier 6 carrier, has an exposed citadel plating that even destroyer HE can citadel. So you can repeatedly get citadels on it, even just throwing high explosive. It doesn't have to pen into the ship. It just has to hit the exposed part of the citadel on the outer wall. So 70 millimeters, while we have the Smolensk up here, 70 millimeters is interesting because let's think about a 457. Let's think about a 457 millimeter shell. I'm going to go back and I'm going to pop up paint and we're going to do a little more math here. So let's think about this 457 millimeter shell. So 457 divided by 6 equals what? I don't know this one offhand, so I'm going to go ahead and use the calculator for this. But it is 76 millimeters. So with your 457, your big gun battleship, because big gun battleships are cool. If you take a shot at a Smolensk, and that Smolensk is flat broadside, absolutely just man-moding it up, flat broadside, can you citadel it? The answer is probably no. Why do I say probably? Because again, it's not, shells don't just come out flat. They can be fired and start to drop. So at a distance, at maybe 10 or 12 or 14 kilometers, you might have just enough shell drop that 70 millimeters thickens up just a little bit to 76, in which case it's going to prime the shell and you're going to get a citadel. But if this Smolensk is staring at you flat broadside, like 3 kilometers away from your ship, you might actually just shoot your shell in one side and out the other because there's not enough armor for it to wake up, prime that fuse, and pop. It's waiting for the thicker, it's waiting for the bunker. It's waiting for that big wall that it was built for to burst through so that it can hit the other side. And instead, it's just going to end up going right through the ship and into the water and give you an overpen, which can be pretty tough. So as a battleship player, it's worth remembering that because if you see a cruiser that's completely broadside, oh, this dude is dead. If you've got a big gun battleship, you may actually overpen a citadel depending on how much weaker that ship is to you. You might be in a tier 8 battleship against a tier 6 cruiser and you might just overpen right through its vitals. You actually find that happens quite a bit at the lower tiers, like tier 2 and tier 3, where citadel armor doesn't exist really. But because we talked about some HE, why don't we talk about an armor scheme? I want a spaced armor scheme. Does the Nevsky have spaced armor? I think it does. It does. Okay, so we're going to remove the nose here. And we're going to notice that this is casemate armor. And this is Citadel armor. So Citadel casemate. So if you fire HE, HE is going to hit the deck. It's not going to get to the Citadel. Fire HE, it's going to hit the side. It's not going to get to the Citadel. Fire something even that breaches 140 millimeters, like Super Sap or whatever. It's not going to get to the Citadel because it does not go through the wall. It strikes exactly the armor that it hits, and it stops and deals damage there. It deals damage to the part that it hits. It goes no further. So the very fact that there's just this little bit of space, or if we look at like the Henry IV, the French cruiser, the Henri IV, which I do not have in my port because floaty shells, man. Oh my god. If we check this out, it has just this little bit of spaced armor that's able to, if you hit this torpedo protection with HE, you may not be dealing damage. People kind of talk about that as a black hole because there's just that little bit of something there that it's going to end up basically absorbing the hit instead of transferring it to the ship. Although I think you might get 10% damage by hitting that. Still, it can feel like it just goes into a black hole because it's not actually able to go through. You would need, at the very minimum, you would need armor piercing to be able to breach this wall and any other walls in the way before being able to go into the Citadel to get the hit. Okay. It's also enough to Citadel a Minotaur and a Neptune. Exactly enough. Yeah. So if you're in a battleship, you can do pretty scary, gnarly things against light cruisers. Medium cruisers, you kind of have to ask yourself. So, okay, let's go a little further on this battleship overpen stuff, because I hear a lot of people getting frustrated about battleships and overpenning. Let's look again. Let's look at the Des Moines. If I can find it. It's going to be hiding here in plain sight. So we're looking at the Des Moines. Take the camo off. Just so we're seeing ship. There you go. Put that on. Just, oh my gosh. Just give me like basic ship. There we go. There we go. Basic ship. Rocking. Okay, so we're looking at a Des Moines. If you have aggressively big guns, and you take a shot at this in your battleship, 152 millimeters of armor, that's probably going to prime any shell that you're going to throw at it. 457s, 460s. I think we did the math on that. Let's just double check that real quick. The math on that was 76 millimeters. Yeah, as long as that shell goes through, it's primed. The fuse is armed. You're going to deal Citadel damage. But this 30 millimeters here, the 27 on the nose here, remember, the 457 needs 76 millimeters. 76 millimeters to arm. So if you're firing at a Des Moines broadside, that's just going to give you overpens with AP. If you're firing at a Des Moines angled, maybe like a 45-degree angle, which is the point where the ricochet starts for normal AP, that might not pen, or that might not actually arm on the ship. It might only give you like 50 millimeters or something like that, 50 or maybe even 60, but not the 70 that you need. Now maybe the shell drop, like if it's at a really good range, that might thicken it up just a little bit more and kind of get it there, but if you shoot the nose, you're probably just puncturing through. So it's actually pretty important to remember that maybe the 457s are pretty big, but if you have 406s, which are pretty standard gun sizes, or 380s, if you're able to take a shot where it's not going to ricochet, but the cruiser is angled, that cruiser is actually thickening up its armor, meaning that it's allowing your shells to fuse and pen and deal more damage in that sense. So it's kind of it's a bit of a balancing act for a cruiser. Now, if they can angle so aggressively that your shells are just going to ricochet, well, then obviously that's going to keep them safe. We'll talk about overmatch in just a second because that's something you have to factor in. But if they can angle very aggressively, then they can ward off a lot of the incoming damage from even battleship shells as long as they don't overmatch because they're just going to bounce off. But if they're angling somewhat, maybe they really want to get this last turret involved. And that's showing just enough side that it's not an auto bounce. It might actually rip in. Then those bigger caliber guns are not going to are not going to overpen like they would on this casemate, like they would on this nose. They're actually going to prime the fuse and deal pen damage. They're going to do so much more against this angled cruiser that's not angled well enough to actually bounce your shots. It's just worth remembering. So if you ever like, oh, I got this fully broadside cruiser, oh, overpens, it just means the shells didn't connect here. Or your shells are so big because you're in a monster of a battleship that you might actually just be straight through and throughing the Citadel if it's a light cruiser or an ultralight cruiser. All right, so I mentioned overmatch. What is overmatch? Let's pull up paint again. Oh no, did I close it? Oh, okay, there we go. I see paint again. Rawr. What is overmatch? So we will go back here and we'll kind of look at this from the other side. So let's say that this is that Des Moines bow with 27 millimeters of armor. I'll keep it red because red's fun. So 27 millimeters of armor, what can actually overmatch that? We're going to do kind of like we have some math over there. 406 millimeters. And it's divided by 14.3. Which, why the hell is it that number? I'm going to be honest, I don't know. It might have something to do with millimeters to inches, but it's 14.3 is the magic number. So what is 406 divided by 14.3? Well, it's certainly not that because I didn't use the decimal. 14.3, it is 28. It's actually 28.3 for those that are counting. But basically, it's going to be 28 millimeters. So in this case, you could have armor piercing selected in a battleship. You could have a pretty big gun, a 406, in that battleship. And you're going to fire at this nose, in which case you have 28 millimeters of overmatch. And because you have an overmatch condition, the ricochet is ignored. That part of the math gets ignored. It gets thrown out. You do not roll a ricochet check. Ricochets are impossible against 28 millimeters and below because your overmatch value exceeds that. I don't actually think there is a 28 millimeters in the game, so you don't have to worry about that. 27 and below is basically what you overmatch. So this shell can go right into the meat of the ship, even though they're well angled to you. Now note, if you are still angled slightly, you might end up having a through and through. You're still going to be able to, you could still in this case actually have an overpen where it's not catching into the meat of the ship. It's just ripping through the nose. It's not going to ricochet, but you might get an overpen. But something to remember is if this is 26 and you have this really aggressive shot, that might actually be so aggressive that it ends up being enough to arm the shell because it's sliding along a thick plate over a long distance, or like the slanted plate over a long distance. And if that arms the shell, yeah, there's only that 30 millimeters, 27 here, etc., to where technically it wouldn't pen, but because you're shooting through the nose, it may actually pen off of this angled armor and deal pen damage into the ship. And also, I mean, if it's going through the nose, hell, you might as well shoot at the Citadel because it's a big battleship gun. It'll rip into the Citadel. You can delete this thing even from the front. So overmatch, super important. If this was 380 actually I think has 25 millimeter overmatch. Doesn't overmatch up to 27. So the 380s, however, if they were shot, they would just ricochet. If it was direct ahead, you would not be able to bite into the ship, and you'd probably just end up wasting shells. So if that were the case, you'd probably shoot at the superstructure, because you're really just not going to have a damage expectation elsewhere. But if you have overmatch, very powerful. In some of the lower tiers, you may actually have guns on cruisers, like there are 203s that can overmatch other cruisers. You could shoot them through the nose. But as a general rule, just as a general concept, I'm going to talk a little bit about, let's see, let's go ahead. I think we've looked at this one enough. We can change this. And we'll put destroyers, destroyers, cruisers, battleships, battleshipos, and put this up here, DD, CA, BB. And then I'm actually going to double this, is what I will do. Assuming I'm gonna be able to double it, because that would be helpful. We'll put that over there. Maybe I'll trim these together, make it look a little nice. Because looking nice is fun. I say that when my fashion sense is terrible. Okay, so in this case, we're going to make these side targets. And then these will be bow targets. And just for a little further understanding of what, what's in what column, do something like that. So if you are in a destroyer and you are firing at a destroyer in its side, what would you shoot? You would probably shoot HE. Why would you shoot HE? Because high explosive is not going to overpen. And generally, destroyers don't have enough armor that armor piercing would go right through, in which case you'd only be getting overpen damage. As this game is conditional, there's always that off chance, or that weird situation. You could be in a destroyer firing at another destroyer that has some thicker armor in the middle, like a Khabarovsk or a Delny, or even a Gearing actually has a 21mm plate instead of that 19. That might be enough that you could pen with AP, but that's going to come down to the knowledge of your ship. And we're talking about basics right now. So in general, if you're in a destroyer and you're firing at a destroyer and it's showing you your side, you're probably throwing HE. In fact, I'm going to go a little further and say that if the destroyer is bow in, you're probably throwing HE. The only time you're throwing AP is when it's angled, and that's going to be a calculated decision. For the most part, especially when you're newer, just being able to throw a shell that as long as it hits, it's probably dealing some kind of damage is a hell of a lot better than trying to min-max for that really juicy side hit where you get the AP in there and you deal like, bam, 7,000 damage. Instead, you're going to get a consistent 2,000, 2,000, 2,000, because as long as your aim is on point, you're dealing damage to the destroyer, it's getting hurt, eventually it'll sink. So destroyers against a cruiser from the side. This is conditional. Now, we watched as an Elbing was able to pen into a cruiser. It was able to pen into a Des Moines. Is actually able to Citadel it out to a distance, a fairly distant amount. But the Elbing has some bigger guns. It has 150mm guns. A lot of destroyers are going to be more in that 120-ish millimeter. They're going to be a little floatier. They're going to be a little weaker. But still, if you're just seeing the side of the ship, you might not be able to shoot for Citadels. Citadels on cruisers probably a little more protected than what a DD is able to do, but you could use AP, or you can use HE and go for the superstructure and just fires in general. You could do either, and that's completely okay. If you're going to be using AP, you want to aim for the areas of the ship where it's not just going to rip through both sides. You're not aiming for the nose of the ship where it's a really thin piece and it's just going to go through. But you could absolutely aim for the stern of the ship or the nose of the ship if you feel like, I can pen this, I'm good. Or the casemate of the ship. That's the area of the ship above the sidewall armor. I would not shoot at the superstructure. Superstructure is super thin, so you're probably just going to get overpens, in which case you just use HE. But it is actually a choice, because there can be cruisers where your high explosive is not able to pen the sides, but your AP could. Whereas if you're just saying, screw it, I'm just going to shoot at the superstructure, man, then just HE and be happy. But it is a choice. In terms of a bow-in situation, you would only use HE, because you're not going to be able to bite in. You don't overmatch, certainly not in a destroyer, so you can't ignore the ricochet check. You have to throw what's going to matter. And even though that high explosive might not penetrate because it might have too much armor for you, it could still set fires. And that's good. Setting fires is fine. All right, so against battleships. Battleships have enough extra armor that AP might not be viable. If you're an advanced user and you feel pretty comfortable, like battleships at tier 8 and up, they have 32mm of armor on the nose, on the stern. Your AP isn't great, but it probably does that. It probably does that out to 5 or 6 kilometers. So you could probably AP the nose or AP the stern if you had a good angle for it. You could do that. You might be able to angle you might be able to pen the casemate because it's like 32 or something millimeters of armor. But there are also battleships that they just have a lot of armor. So AP can be pretty unreliable. You start needing game knowledge if you're going to make that happen. So you're going to throw basically HE, and you're going to try to aim for the superstructure only. And the same thing when you're bow on. Again, if you're bow on, you're definitely not going to get in your AP anywhere because it's just going to bounce. So you're going to throw HE at it. You're probably going to shatter a lot. Unless you can hit the superstructure, that's pretty weak, so you'll probably get some hits there. But you will be able to set fires. Battleships get lit on fire because they get spammed by HE all day, up, down, and sideways. So, you know, it's a battleship in its natural habitat. It's being spammed by HE and lit on fire. Okay, cruisers. Cruisers against destroyers. Probably HE. Just as a general concept, probably HE. You could use AP, but then you start having the problems of, will my AP fuse? And if the destroyer angles to you, if you don't overmatch the destroyer, it might just bounce your shells, in which case they're not going to do any damage. HE is reliable. It's, as long as it hits, it deals damage. Destroyers don't have a lot of health. You're probably picking HE. Cruisers against destroyers that are bow in, same thing. Good news is your HE is probably strong enough that even if you hit a turret, you're probably still dealing damage. Because destroyers just don't have armor. And again, if you don't overmatch, if the destroyer's pointed straight at you, that AP might just bounce. I've actually lived against some Minotaurs when I was spotted by just pointing my nose at them until I was able to go dark. Because even though they've got really good angles on their AP, even though they've got a really fast-acting fuse, if it can't bite in, it's just not going to be able to do anything. Cruisers against cruisers. So this one is also conditional. It's AP HE. Why is this conditional? You may be at a range where your AP is not going to get citadels. Okay, well, if your AP is in a range where it's not going to get citadels, is it going to pen normal armor? So again, let's think about the Des Moines. The Des Moines 100-something, whatever citadel belt, hell, maybe even it's 200. It's going to be a significant amount. If we look, Des Moines is 152. So there we go, 152. But 30 mil elsewhere. And your guns might be significant enough that 30 mil might not actively pen it. So if it's flat broadside to you or only slightly angled to you, you might not get pens. But if your guns are smaller, 150s, you know, they're not like 260 or 300 millimeter guns on some cruisers, you could probably throw AP because you'll get pens. That's fine, especially if it's at range, because that's going to slow down the shell a little bit. It's going to make it fall a little more, which means it's going to go through a little bit thicker armor, which means it's a little more likely to pen. It's a little more likely to trip the fuse and result in pens. But if you can't guarantee that, your guns are too big, you're not able to get citadels, or frankly, you're just throwing shells because, geez, I just want to hit the thing. Like, it's the enemy cruiser, they're wiggly, they're hard to hit, they're maneuverable, they're whatever. You could just throw HE, and that's perfectly fine. HE is almost universally always an okay choice for whatever situation you come into. It's never the best choice, or it's never like the greatest, most amazing thing, but it's almost always the correct choice. Oh my goodness. It doesn't have the high highs, but it's always going to do something. And something is a hell of a lot better than nothing. Going against cruisers that are bow in, the answer is only HE. Now this is technically conditional as well, and I'll go ahead and explain why. So you have a Salem versus a Moskva, or a Des Moines versus a Moskva, and they're bow in, they're staring, contesting each other at 5 kilometers, 6 kilometers, 3 kilometers, whatever. They may choose to throw AP because their armor-piercing shells may pierce the guns of the enemy ship. And if you throw enough rounds into that turret, you might break it. Just straight up destroy the dang turret. And if their turret's broken, they can't shoot at you. If you knock it offline, they might be able to repair it, but if you break it, then it's gone. So if you're in a bow-in situation, you might throw AP because you're throwing it at the turret on the hope that you're going to kill the turret, but it's going to take time, it's going to take shots, and if you're able to get the AP into the turret, I think it only does overpen damage. It only does 10% to the ship. So it's not going to attrition it down. Whereas we saw, like with the destroyer, I was able to shoot just at the nose. HE probably pens the nose of the enemy cruiser. So you could just shoot it in the nose and deal damage. Eventually the nose will saturate. You might try shooting the superstructure as well, try to float over the guns, do a little damage that way. But HE is going to be much more consistent. So if you've ever been in a match where you're seeing a cruiser throwing AP shells at another cruiser that's bow in, and you're like, you see somebody going, no, why are you doing this? It's because the ricochet just removes the shell damage, just nothing. Whereas HE is much more consistent. And cruisers against battleships. So, I have to, once again, give both. And there's a reason for it. We're going to talk about it. So, the good news about battleships is the armor is a little thicker. So, as I was mentioning with the cruisers, you might have a situation where the armor is just not thick enough to be able to prime your shell. Well, there's a really good chance that the armor is, in fact, thick enough to be able to fuse your shell. But the armor might actually be too thick for you to be able to breach it, in which case you don't really get to do anything. So I would say, in general, the default choice is going to be high explosive on the side, unless you are really close. Unless you're really comfortable in your shooting, you know how to accurately place shots into the casemate, into the stern, into the nose, into the wherever the hell you're trying to shoot. Otherwise, just throw HE at it. The good news is, as a cruiser, your guns are bigger. They're more likely to set fires. They have more pen generally as a rule, so they can probably pen even some of the thicker battle armor as long as it's lightly armored. The Des Moines, for instance, is 33 millimeters of pen. So if it fires at a Conqueror is a battleship, but it's covered all over in 32 millimeters. So it's just going to pen all day. You could pen with AP, but AP has a ricochet chance. It's up to you. The big thing is, the biggest consideration for when am I going to use AP is, can I get a Citadel? And if the answer is no, then the next question is, actually, let's do this. We'll do, all right, RAR, it's showing black. You can do this. No? All right, well, screw it. Fine. You know what? I'll just make a new text thing. That's what I'll do. But if that's how you're gonna play, there we go. All right. So, can I Citadel? Because Citadel is extremely important. If you can get Citadels, absolutely go for the Citadels. Do it. Citadels deal extreme amounts of damage compared to the damage you would do otherwise, and it's often very hard to heal back, which means it sticks. It sticks in a way that HE damage does not. It sticks in a way that fire does absolutely not, because you can heal all of the fire damage back. So if you can go for a Citadel, do it. If you can't, and this is regarding AP, can I pen? I'll put, because we're talking about it, fuse. Can I pen? Can you breach through the armor? And also, can you breach through the armor and fuse? If you can get pen damage, that's cool. If the answer is no, if no, HE. So you can HE the crap out of the superstructure. You can HE the crap out of the nose, the stern, the side, whatever. You can absolutely do that and feel comfortable about it, because you're going to be getting somewhat consistent. And if you're just shattering all the time, you might be setting fires. And fires can do quite a bit of damage, especially against battleships. Bow in, it's just the one choice. It's going to be HE. And you're going to notice a lot of the time it's HE, because positioning in the game is quite tough. If you're in a position where you can throw AP shells and you can just rip an enemy ship in half, Citadel, 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 just you're tickling that tickle me Elmo spot, and he's just laughing himself to the grave, then you've already solved your question. Citadel the crap out of them and win. Outside of that, there's going to be a lot of situations where the enemy ship is moving, they're turning, they're hiding, they're peeking, they're this, they're that, and you never quite have that certain shot, which means you use high explosive. You might get a fire, you might get a little damage, but you're not going to get critical amounts of oof. Battleship against the DD, what a shock. It's going to be HE. Battleship against a bow-on destroyer, also going to be HE. There is a rule in the game that anything over, I think it might be 280 millimeters. I could be wrong on that. It might be, I think it's 280, but somebody can probably quote me or tell me if I'm right or wrong, where after that, a destroyer can only take 10% of rated damage. Basically, it's an automatic overpen from any armor-piercing or semi-armor-piercing shell. It's an automatic overpen. that does not affect high explosive shells out of battleships. So that actually uniquely makes the Italian battleships suck against destroyers, because they have AP and they have semi-armor piercing, and that's it. And then they have secondaries, which are kind of meh. So you can throw shells at these destroyers. First off, your accuracy is not great. But second off, even if you hit the things, you're not doing very much damage. So there's a really good chance that if you get close to a destroyer, he can just come up and torp you, and you're not going to be able to stop him, which sucks. So battleships, HE against destroyers, there's really no other choice. It's just the best. Side on. So yes, it's conditional, but the answer is still AP. You might overpen. That's absolutely true, but you might citadel it. And if you citadel it, you're going to be slapping a cruiser off the side of the earth. Just bam, white barred, gone. Like, it can come with a side of overpens. It can come with a side of just missing the dang thing. Because when you've got those big guns, you don't get the amazing accuracy that smaller guns will give you. Because big guns are such an incredible threat, for game balancing reasons, they don't shoot as accurately. It just kind of guarantees that you don't auto win, you know? But still, AP is the choice. Even better, if the cruiser isn't fully side on, they're like angled, because then it's possible that you might still get citadels, but you might also get pens with those shells that would otherwise be over pens, because the armor is angled, so it's thicker, so it actually lights the fuse, and you do pretty gnarly stuff. So side on or angled, yes. The only time you would not shoot AP is when you are bow on. So I'm going to put this, and I've got to give the caveat, I've got to describe as to why I'm saying it. Battleships shooting against a cruiser want to shoot AP if they have overmatch. Because overmatch, you might go through the nose into the meat of the ship and get a good pen. You might go through the nose of the ship into the citadel and just kill it. So if you have overmatch, you want to throw AP at cruisers. If you don't, it's okay to use HE. It's completely okay to use high explosive, because you can consistently deal damage through hitting HE on the nose, HE on the side, HE through fires, whatever. It's completely okay. The big thing is, in a battleship, you almost always have armor piercing loaded, because you never know when this cruiser is going to gamer turn in front of you. He's just going to like, YOLO, you know, he's just going to do it. In which case, if you have high explosive loaded, that's one of the saddest moments in gaming. No. And you fire HE and it hits the citadel and you're like, no. So often, pretty much people will just tell you, just always throw AP. Just always throw AP, but it's never that simple. Specifically, if you play the Italian battleships, they actually have a better than normal gun feeder, which allows you to swap between AP and semi-armor piercing. So you can use gun feeder on battleships to help you. Like, if you see that moment and you can identify it quickly enough, you might be able to change over from like one to the other if you happen to be on the wrong one. But in general, you're probably throwing AP, because in general, battleships are going to overmatch cruisers. They're going to do some damage. But if you're using like a Pommern, if you're using a Mecklenburg, using something with smaller caliber, you're probably throwing HE, and that's completely okay. And moving on, battleship versus battleship side, absolutely AP, and for two reasons, actually. Reason number one, obviously, is the potential to get citadels, if you're close enough. You're not always close enough. Battleships have a crap load of armor. So even though they have big guns, they still might not breach through and get the citadel. But the other is, battleships have a crap load of armor. So when you're firing at the side, over here for cruisers, it is conditional. And it's conditional because you might just still shatter, or you might not get the results you're looking for with your AP. Battleships firing against battleships, you probably want the AP. You might still get overpens. Again, with that 457 example, it was 76 millimeters of armor. And let me go ahead and bop paint off real quick. And we're going to look at, I kind of want to look at the Montana or something. We'll look at Wisconsin, because whiskey's cool. If we look at Wisconsin, you have 32 millimeters here. That's not 70 mils plus. We have 38 mil. 38 mil again. But just below, this is casemate. We have 307. So we're going to start very possibly when we throw HE or AP shells for a cruiser, it can pen the 38, it can pen the 32, sure, but it could be stopped real quick. Whereas a battleship shell, not going to be stopped real quick. So you might get some real good meaty hits into the casemate where there's a little extra armor, a little more oomph. It's not on every battleship, but certainly in the middle tiers, there's some casemates where there's some pretty aggressive armor schemes in middle tiers. Not so much in the higher tiers, but still, you're going to get some good pens. Even if you're not going to get Citadels, you're going to get some good pens with AP. And the AP on a battleship is rewarding enough. Like if we check out the damage here, high explosive deals 5,700. And then because you're not going to get a Citadel, you're only dealing a third of that when it pens. So roughly 1,900. Whereas the AP deals 13.5. Again, if it's not a Citadel, you're only dealing a third of that, but that's still like 4,300 damage, something like that. Like it's a significant chunk. And if with the Wisconsin, you're able to get 6 of those shells into the meat of the ship, even if it's not a Citadel, that's still just going to slap. So battleship against battleship, the answer is AP. Really unlikely you're going to choose HE outside of maybe playing like the British battleship line. Where the British battleship line has kind of special AP that it primes really quick. So if you fuse it, it's going to pop almost immediately, which is good against cruisers, but not as good against battleships. So maybe you just throw HE anyway because it's got great fire chance, it's got great raw pen. And bow in, battleship against battleship. I'm not even going to do this because the amount of battleships that overmatch other battleships, at least at high tier, is not very high. The Yamato overmatches nose. Hanover, Satsuma, in comp, overmatches 32 millimeters of armor and actually will shoot through the nose of an enemy battleship. But like all the rest of the battleships don't. They bounce if you shoot bow in. That being said, you probably still have AP loaded. Because AP is useful against cruisers. It's useful against battleships that are turning. You know, you have a lot of damage potential. So if the enemy is bow in, you'd be shooting for the superstructure. You would be shooting to try and get shots to stick here. Now note, 19 millimeters of armor. There's like no way in hell this is going to pen, or at least there's almost no way in hell it's going to fuse. But if you can get the shots into here, it would just bounce here. You might not break the guns because the guns are battleship caliber. They're going to have quite a lot of armor, but you might get it to stick. And occasionally, maybe one of those shells rides right along the side of this 19 and it's just enough for it to fuse and you get some good pens in. It can happen, but it's not something necessarily to count on, which is why I'm going to make the controversial thing and I'm going to say HE. So I understand this one's controversial. It's okay. Do what you want. But in general, this is basically how that chart's going to go. So against destroyers, there's a lot of situations where you're not going to be able to reliably pen with HE or your armor piercing. So it's completely okay to just throw high explosive and use a lot of fires. Aim for the weak spots. You're accurate enough to aim for superstructure and consistently hit it. For cruisers, there's a little bit more kind of like dialing in that AP, especially against other cruisers, and battleships are going to rely more heavily on AP than any of the other classes because of overmatch capabilities and just the amazing damage potential that they have. But sometimes the guns are so big that there's actually a downside of bringing a battleship with just a gigantic caliber, because you run a real risk of overpenning the crap out of all sorts of stuff that you're shooting at because it's not giving you the thickness that you need to be able to hit to prime the fuse. Alrighty, so I think I've talked a whole lot about shells. So let me go ahead and ask chat. We have gone for, holy crap, an hour and a half. I talk a lot. Do you have any questions? Is there anything that you would like to ask me to go a little deeper into, or do you have any specific situations that you have some questions about? And I'll be happy to answer. Otherwise, I'll be probably hitting that dusty trail. It is a Friday, so, and actually there's another question. How do you guys like this time on a Friday? Normally I do these stages on a Thursday, which can conflict with clan battles. And also, I mean, hell, it's Friday night, you know, it's a little easier on the time zone, right? So if you can give me some feedback in chat, that is much appreciated, because I actually record the chat messages as my feedback. I have to report when the stages are done to tell people like, hey, people liked it, woo. So even if you don't have a question, if you could tell me like, I liked this sucked, just give me something. And technically, Jambajan here, I think, is the Discord man, so he'll be able to see it already because he's here. But I have to take pictures of this, and yeah. First time checking you out here. Love it. Woot. Thank you very much. You are correct. It's 280 millimeters. It's used to not apply to the Khabarovsk and the Harugumo. So the Harugumo actually is such a thick boat that you might have been able to prime off of it and get pens. So the 280 rule kind of helps to save the Harugumo, give it a little more possibility of not just getting alpha'd. And the Khabarovsk, as well as the Delny, I can go ahead and check those out. I love the Khabarovsk, by the way. Well, thank you, Rar. I played the crap out of the Russian DD line. It's great. Delny is the current one on the tech tree, and you'll notice it's a 50 millimeter plate. So like, you can pen off of this. If you've got like a Des Moines or something, the 203s, it's a significant, it's like 30 something millimeter. You can pen this with the Des Moines and just rip this apart if you get into close range. Realistically, the Delny should never be in close range. But if it is, and you can rip into this plate, you will fuse, you will deal pens, you will beat the crap out of it, because armor piercing does so much damage compared to HE. And technically, if you fired HE, it would actually shatter on this plate. So better to use either HE where you're pointing at the nose or the stern and avoiding this in that specific instance. You're very new, so it's very helpful. Well, good. I literally remembered looking on the wiki trying to figure out what shells should I use, and I didn't know. So that's where I came up with the idea of doing a how-to about it. Thanks for the time and the effort. Keep up the good work. Thank you very much. Chart is very helpful. Yeehaw. You like this? I think you might be able to benefit from a slideshow in certain parts, so you can see a lot of these hard to visualize cases in detail. Yep, I could try to make a PowerPoint presentation, but I'll be honest, there's a lot of me when I'm talking about stuff that's kind of just winging it. People ask me questions, I give answers. And basically these how-to sessions have been me sort of asking, can you just talk about this for a bit? And then it almost turns into a little bit of a podcast. But I did actually think about prepping some slides. Even though I know most of this already, this is great. Well, I'm glad it's a good reminder. All right, so I see some people typing in chat. I'll give you just a little bit longer, and if there's not much else to go into, then I will go ahead and call it. I did have the idea that maybe we could go into aircraft armament, but as it's already been an hour and a half, I think I will. I think I'll save that maybe for a future one. Beginner-friendly trees. It would depend on what class you're looking to play. It always helps me if you can narrow down the question, because otherwise I get a little overloaded. But if we're talking just in terms of classes, I always recommend for CV that you start with the US line, the Midway line in particular. It has high explosive ammo, which, since we literally just talked about it, high explosive is easier to use than armor piercing. All you have to do is hit the target. As long as you have enough pen, you're going to hurt the target. And typically, the bombs the Ranger has, the Lexington has, the Midway have, they're very good about dealing damage to the targets at their tier. Same thing with their high explosive rockets. They're really good at penning the targets at the tier. The Midway's rockets can even pen battleships to an extent. So it has tiny TIMs, which are very good at it, but like even the basic rockets have 33 millimeters of pen, so they could rip into a lightly armored battleship that has 32, for instance. So it's an excellent line as a first line. Submarine, I'm going to be honest, I have no clue, but I've heard a lot of people say that the German line is probably the most new player friendly, so I can recommend that. In terms of DDs, the first line that I played was the German destroyer line, which has hydro. It has hydro out to a good distance, which can be very helpful for seeing torpedoes and stuff that are coming in. As a newer DD player, you probably don't think about that stuff, so it can be helpful, but the hydro doesn't really come into its own until literally about tier 10. I mean, it's powerful in the other areas, but Tier 10 is where your Hydra range is almost as long as your actual surface detection range, so you can do some kind of funny tricks with that. Otherwise, it's not powerful. So instead, I would probably recommend the UK line as a really good line to play in a destroyer. You have torpedoes, they hurt. You have some options there. The smokes, you have a lot of smokes you can use. They have kind of short duration, so if you find yourself in a pickle, pop a smoke, do the thing, leave. Skirmish, leave. You have good guns, which are nice. They're a little floaty, which is unfortunate, but if you take a fight, you can brawl with something. And I think once you get to the Jutland, actually, you start having a heal. So you can get in somewhere, you can take a scrap with somebody, you can lick your wounds and come back for more and do it again. A lot of presence with these deities. So it's a friendly line in that sense. Also, the US line is fairly friendly, but it's also more supportive. So this is a little more advanced because you want to be able to use the smoke to its fullest benefit, and the guns are really floaty. So it can be very hard, I think, for a newer player to play. For cruisers, I'm going to say something that's probably a little controversial here. I would say either the Zau line for cruisers or the German Hindenburg line for cruisers. And the reason why I say that is, for the Japanese line, up until the tier 7, you have a really thickly armored deck and good shell ballistics. So you can hit the enemy because the guns perform well, and they're pretty big. And you have a little more armor than you really think you do. The biggest problem with this line is you tend to have one turret that you really have to show too much side for. So it's like the bait turret. I think that kicks in around tier 6. And the bait turret will get you killed a lot. Because you want to fire all your guns, but you really have to measure yourself. Like, you can fire with all of your guns except one, and that's okay. Because that way you can stay angled enough that you can bounce those shells and you can use the thick armor to the deck. When you get to the Mogami, though, Mogami, Ibuki, Zau, that's where you really do need to have some skilled play. Otherwise, you're just going to get hurt. Because that's when you really can be overmatched by really any battleship you come across. It's quite rough. Whereas German also has comfortable guns, although that only really kicks in around tier 7. And they tend to have pretty forgiving armor schemes, at least at the higher tiers. They're not super amazing. They still get overmatched, but the ballistics allow you to engage at longer range and kind of weather something down. And in the later form, you have a lot of torpedoes that are pretty comfortable in terms of brawling. So in general, German ships are kind of made to brawl. And they can go in and they can hurt stuff. They can get close and they can kill with torpedoes and sort of a forgiving armor scheme. And for battleships, it really depends on the player. My first battleship line, I went up to the Montana. I hated the North Carolina. People say, oh, she's got accurate guns. That's great. The shells are so floaty. On the AP, I had no idea how the hell to hit stuff. So literally, as a new player, when I was grinding through the North Carolina, I just didn't use AP. I only used a high explosive. Because the high explosive, if you look at this, it actually goes significantly faster. The AP is 700 meters per second versus the high explosive at 820. Yeah, there are more characteristics than that, but in general, I could shoot stuff with HE and hit it. I wouldn't use AP unless it was within 6 kilometers, which is not really how you want to play the ship. You want to make use of AP in a battleship, but it was so hard as hell to shoot. But it got better with the Iowa, and the Montana has similar shells, so that was okay. I actually really enjoyed the German line, which used to have a GK, but is now Preußen, because the ballistics on the guns are great. The accuracy sucks. They go wherever the hell they want to go, but the ballistics are great. They're very comfortable, so if you're a newer player, actually hitting your target works. When you get to Bismarck, you start having secondaries. They matter, but they're not showstoppers. They're not award winners. The Schlieffen line, however, has astounding secondaries. The Preußen line, So they're very helpful against other battleships where it's a big ship. They're probably going to get some good hits in. Cruisers, they'll weather them down. DDs, they'll chip them occasionally. They're not great, but they are more. They are pressure. And the armor on these is excellent. fantastic. So as long as you preserve your health pool into the middle of the game or the late game, you can just start charging stuff, and you're the juggernaut, bitch. You know, just going in there. Typically, the biggest issues you're going to find with like German battleships is where people commit really early, and they just get hell spammed by lots of enemy ships. They lit on fire, just spammed. They lose a bunch of health, and then they're licking their wounds. And by the end of the match, they just don't have much to swing with. Whereas if you really preserve that, which, yeah, your main guns are kind of sus, but if you preserve that into the middle of the match where there are less enemies because people have started getting sunk, you can start shoving straight into the face, and just it's so hard to deal with it because they're so heavily armored. They have so much health. So I really enjoyed the GK line. If you're more looking for a gunning line, the US line's probably fine. I am less informed on battleships in general, so but those are two, at least. They give you kind of two flavors, two different ways to play. And I think that actually covers all the classes, so sure. Come on, Discord. Let me see stuff again. How does SAP fit into your last chart? Yeah, we can look at that. So let me pop this back up. How does SAP fit in? Okay. So SAP is basically, it's between high explosive and AP. The biggest difference is high explosive can set fires, SAP cannot. So you have better pen, and typically the shells deal more damage. So you can make up for the difference in the fires you didn't set by getting raw pens with the SAP. So basically, wherever you see HE in this chart, you can replace it with SAP, and you're pretty much correct. They are functionally the same thing. And just to go back to this, can you Citadel? If you can Citadel, you should use AP. Can you pen and fuse? If you're playing something like the Venezia, let me go ahead and close this. So let's look at the Venezia line. If you're playing the Venezia, you're going to notice that the semi-armor piercing shells do 5,200 damage, and the armor piercing shells deal 4,800 damage. Which, yeah, the SAP does a little more, but it's very similar. The armor piercing is a little slower to fire, sure, but again, pretty similar. So when it comes down to, sorry, I'm tabbing back and forth with a bunch of screens here. So when it comes down to, can I Citadel? If you can Citadel, then AP is the superior choice, because the amount of damage that a Citadel can do is so crippling, so powerful, that you have to go for it. It's too juicy of a target to avoid. When you get to the can I pen / fuse, SAP, you don't have to fuse. SAP is like HE. If it hits, it hits, whatever. If it doesn't ricochet, it's gonna pop. So you don't have to worry about the fusing. The thing you have to worry about is, can you pen? You would have to do the same thing with AP, but AP has the additional check of, can I pen and fuse? Otherwise, it's an overpen. If you can pen but not fuse, that is where you would consider SAP instead. Because if you fired AP and you were able to pen, but you just threw and threw the ship, for the Venezia, I'm just going to say it's 5,000 damage for both shells because that's easy numbers, then the Venezia would deal 500 damage per shell because it's overpens. Whereas the SAP cannot overpen. As soon as it hits, it pops. It is not capable of overpenning, in which case you would deal a third of rated damage, which is 1,600. So you'd be dealing over 3 times as much. 33% of rated damage is what a pen will do, assuming you're hitting a non-saturated section of a ship. So that's where the choice would come down between AP and SAP. But really, the biggest question is, can you Citadel? If so, go for AP. And then the next question is, can I pen? SAP has an amount of pen. It has more than HE would. The sap on the Venezia, if I double check that, is 54 millimeters, which is a lot. But if you're shooting something that has 70 millimeters, then that's not going to pen. There's never going to be a point where it's going to pen. So probably shoot AP there, because AP might have more than 70 millimeters of pen, meaning that you could do some damage in that instance. Really depends on what you're trying to shoot. So like if you're shooting a Smolensk, AP would be the way, because can I Citadel? Yes. If you can't Citadel, can you pen? Yes, but it would result in overpens. Okay, well then do not shoot at the Citadel, but shoot sap so that you're just getting raw pen damage. So basically, I would replace HE, but there is obviously the caveat regarding AP there. We have a troll question. As the greatest player in the world, why are you educating less capable players? Because that's the purpose of the how-to series, is to talk about stuff. So I'm trying to pass along the knowledge that I have. Realistically, there's a really cool video. Oh man, I wonder if I could find this. Just because it's honestly amazing. If you give me just a moment, I'm gonna see if I can find this real quick. I literally just searched the word YouTube in YouTube. That was pretty amazing. Veritasium Mastery. This is what I'm looking for. Here we go. So I'm gonna go ahead and put this in chat. What about against submarines? Submarines have an AoE shell pattern. I can talk about it in just a second. But in chat, I've linked something from Veritasium called the 4 things it takes to be an expert. It's repetition. It's a valid environment. It's, well, actually, if I play if I play the thing towards the end, I could probably see this cool list that he's got. Right. It's valid environment, many repetitions, timely feedback, deliberate practice. Basically, in order to master something, it's not just about doing it a bunch. It's not just about learning a bunch. It's about doing it in a deliberate way that you are training yourself to do it better than you've done it previously, where you're mentally reviewing what you could have done differently and how that could have been better, could have been worse, etc., making yourself more knowledgeable about the situation and getting to a better point in terms of execution. Like that's how you get better. And there are some players that are absolutely savants at this game. They are amazing. They play every class extremely well because they're fantastic players. Most people are not. Most people are going to pick one class and they're going to play the crap out of it, and they might get good at that one class, and then they'll play others, and some of their skills are going to transition. Like if you're really good at cruisers, you probably get good at guns. So your ability to use guns on destroyers probably pretty comfortable. Ability to use guns on battleships probably pretty comfortable, but it may not transition at all to carriers. It may not transition at all to subs because they don't use guns. And if that's what you specifically have honed in as your mastery, it may not transition over. I am not. I have played a lot of CV. I have played a lot of destroyer. I've played a fair amount of cruiser. A light amount of sub, and I would honestly say a light amount of battleship. Because battleships, you're often engaging at range, which means floaty shells, and I hate floaty shells. I despise them. So it's just not something that I play, which means I can give you some information on mechanics, but in terms of telling you how to be the best battleship in the world, I can't. So is what it is. Have a guess maybe to have a different point of view. All right, that was just a comment. You have a situation for a Moskva shooting HE at a Kaaba, running in front, getting only shatters. What do you do? Thanks. Situation of a Moskva shooting HE at a Kaaba, rushing in front, getting only shatters. Well, we can kind of look at that. So let me pull up the Khabarovsk. It's going to be over here somewhere. Come on. It's here. There we go. Here's the Khabarovsk. So a Moskva has 203s. 203s have 33 millimeters of pen. Oh, I probably need to change this because this dude's going to make like a sound every X amount of seconds. Which is cool, but unfortunately it's repetitive. So, all right, so we're looking at this from port. Come on. So if we look at the armor layout, you have 50 mil here, you got 50 mil, you got even more 50. So there's all kinds of places where you can shatter. But you're in a cruiser and you've got a destroyer that is just charging you. He wants probably to get close so he can run up on your side and he can torp you. Could absolutely be a thing. So where would you shoot as a Moskva with 33 millimeters of pen? First off, would you shoot AP? So Moskva AP is not, it's not special. At 45 degrees, it's going to start wanting to bounce. At 60 degrees, it's going to absolutely bounce. And I could have these slightly off in terms of like angle. So I don't know, it might be like 45 and 60, whatever. Past this, all it's going to do is ricochet. So AP probably not going to do very much. 13 millimeters does, let's see, I'm going to check this real quick. Does do 203s. 203 divided by 14.3, that's the magic number. It's 14. So 203s overmatch up to 14 millimeters of armor, which means if you had AP, you would have to shoot at the superstructure or the turrets, actually, because you will overmatch this. But you're only going to get overpens. That's all you can really expect. You might get a pen if it hits like armor at a weird angle or something, but overpen city. Or you throw HE, and you're going to throw HE here, because it's going to pen the 19, it's going to pen the 12, it's going to pen the 13, it's going to pen the 19. You're going to be shooting for all of this part of the ship that's not 50 mil. Moskva doesn't have great DPM, so it's very possible that a Haba is just going to kick on the afterburner and it's going to run you down. That could happen. It's a pretty meaty little ship. 22,500 base. You can make that even stronger with Survivability Expert, but there's really a lot here for you to be able to shoot that's not 50 where you'd be shattering. So I don't really think that's going to be a huge concern. If the Moskva is coming in sideways, you'd be wanting to shoot the superstructure, you'd be wanting to shoot the nose. And remember, when you're shooting, that means like aiming pretty far out in front so that as the ship's coming forward, the shells will meet in the middle. It can be actually really hard to hit the nose of a fast-moving destroyer. One of the best things I could say to practice that is actually to play co-op. You can use co-op as like a shooting range and practice placing your shells. What about subs? All right, so sub, well, that's interesting. So let me move this over here. And we'll use this little section down here to talk about subs. So what about subs? Go ahead and... So subs are the only ship in the game that you can deal damage to by missing. Which sounds a little strange, but it is what it is. So if you have a sub that's in the water doing sub stuff, you only need to hit near the sub to be able to deal damage to it. So I'm going to put this little circle, say, around there. Because when shells come in, for the three types of shells here, we're going to do, let me change this color. We'll do A for that. We've had this one for HE, and then I'm just going to use this purple color for sap. So armor piercing has a fairly small splash against subs. It actually doesn't have a splash at all against cruisers or against other ships, but it does have a small splash. Oh, I'm sorry, this is not actually showing. There we go. I did see some typing in the chat. Okay, so I made a little section. You didn't get to see it, but now you get to see it, so everybody will be happy. All right, so over here, what about subs? So here we have a sub. We have kind of an area around the sub because, again, you can miss. Armor piercing has a small splash. Now, it doesn't actually have that against other ships. It only deals damage to what it directly interacts with. So you have to directly hit a turret to deal damage directly to the turret. You have to directly hit a casemate to deal damage directly to a casemate. Directly hit an AA gun if you're going to deal direct damage to it. And even then, I don't know if you deal damage to AA guns with armor piercing. It might just not register. It might go through or something. But against subs, there is a little bit of a splash. And the bigger the shell, the bigger the splash. So it might be actually pretty small. It might be a little more than small. I don't know off the top of my head. But you can fire a volley of AP at a sub and you can get hits. Which isn't a bad thing if you have AP loaded, because the amount of damage off the AP shell tends to be pretty significant. What happens is it will prime off the water. So the armor piercing will come in, and even if it doesn't hit the sub, it will prime off the water. So there was actually a hilarious situation where there was a CC, I think floating jetty, was in a Fen Yang. So Fen Yang is the ship that has that lower than normal pen, right? So because it only has the 100mm guns, he was going against a sub, and he's like, I can't hurt the sub. The sub has more armor than I have pen. I can't hit the sub. Turns out he's wrong. He actually can. You could, if you shot you shot high explosive against the sub and shattered, it would be a shatter. But if you shot high explosive at the water next to the sub, it would deal damage because it deals an area of effect around it. So let's say armor piercing has a small effect, might be something like that. High explosive is going to have a much bigger effect. So every high explosive shell, you might, bop the sub, even if it's like kind of on top or kind of close, whatever. And again, if it's a battleship, the bigger the shell, the bigger the explosion radius. So like battleship shells can absolutely get hits. And then you have SAP, which does the damage, or like basically like the explosion size of an HE shell, but the damage of an AP shell, which is why you're going to see if you throw SAP at a sub, you beat the crap out of it. I think there was a video a long time ago from Chaos Machine. It's another one of our CCs where he took a pot shot at a sub all the way like briefly plane spotted on the other side of the map because it was the first like 2 minutes of the game. Took a volley in a Christopher Columbus or whatever, just full volley of SAP, one shot him. Because the sub is on the surface just, sailing forward to play the game. And all of a sudden, one full volley of SAP shells, unlike DDs that have that damage mitigation against bigger guns, this AoE effect doesn't care. So the massive amount of damage that comes out of a SAP broadside out of a battleship just destroyed him. So if it comes to a sub, the best armament, I would say, is actually SAP. SAP is going to be the winner. If it's not that, you can shoot AP, but you have to be very accurate because it's got a very small radius. It's almost like it's not there, but it is there. You can get hits on a sub with AP. You just have to be really close to hit it. Or, I mean, obviously you could hit the sub. But high explosive is the more comfortable option. So SAP is the king. Otherwise, high explosive. After that, armor piercing. Okay. You're either hitting the water and under the hood's hull is how the Bismarck blew up the hood's magazine. Possibly. So you can actually do stuff like that. Let me take that off. And this will be the last question because my voice is getting a little done. So if a shell is coming in, let's use a different DD. We'll use the Sherman, I don't know, whatever. So Sherman's going to be covered in 19 mil. It's a pretty standard sort of thing. So you could have a shell that comes in, and if it was to strike this armor, it would just through and through. You could have that. But it is actually possible for shells to come in, strike the water, and as soon as they hit the water, they're going to arm, but it still has a small period of time from when the fuse is armed to when the shell pops. So the shell comes in, strikes the water, arms off the water, and breaches in and pops inside the ship, dealing full damage. So that is actually a thing that can happen. As for the detonating magazines and stuff, magazines are not rendered in our armor viewer, so we don't actually get to see that. But it would be basically in the area of the turret, below the turret, etc. And you can actually deal damage to the magazines, and when the magazine, I think, hits 0 health is when, you have the possibility of a detonation. It's a very small target, and even when you deal damage to it, I think there's still a percentage chance of it happening. I don't think it's a guaranteed thing. Otherwise, you would absolutely see high skill players just like, that would be their spot. yeah, there's the Citadel, but otherwise they would just be going for detonation kills. But there are magazines in here. It's just they're not rendered. So you can, of course, avoid detonation chance through two methods. One is using a detonation flag, which completely removes the chance for the ship to detonate. And then the other one is actually equipping this upgrade over here, which might be behind my head, but I don't think it is. Magazine Mod 1. Reduces the chance to detonate by 70%, which is a significant amount on an already very low chance. So it basically removes detonation chance. Might get detonated, but it's going to be extremely rare. On my free-to-play account, I made a free-to-play account when the economic changes came in, so I could show like this is what they look like and stuff on a new player account. I ran Magazine Mod 1 on all the ships that I played in randoms, because I didn't have the money for the Juliet Charlie stuff. And to be fair, you very rarely get your guns knocked out. It does not happen very often that guns or whatever actually break. Torpedoes can break, but the guns don't often break. So if you're playing like cruisers or something that's more gun focused, this is nice to have, but it's not mandatory. Okay, well, that's going to be it for me. Thank you, everybody, for hanging out. I hope you really enjoyed it. Once again, if you have any feedback, if you loved it, if you hated it, if you talked too much, his voice was annoying, whatever, please go ahead and leave it in the chat so I can record it and I can ship it on up to my bosses. But other than that, I hope you have a fantastic Friday and enjoy your weekend ahead. So that's going to be it for me.